see the door knocker?
Scrooge.
This is the Disney version. It's just bending down to the ground. Okay, how's that? All right, pretty scary, eh? It's a pretty good example of the way Dickens uses Gothic motifs, and I'm going to be going on to talk about the Gothic novel and the way that Dickens uses the Gothic in his own writings. Yeah, the history of Dickens's use of the Gothic and the origins of the Gothic novel, how it grew up in the late 18th century. It started with a politician and historian, a fairly serious chap called Horace Walpole, very famous politician of the 18th century, and he published a book called The Castle of Otranto. Now, he tricked people. He pretended it was a real medieval story, and they loved it. Oh, this is the real Chusei Jidai no Hanashi no Ikikata, and they really liked the representation that Walpole gave of an Italian medieval story. He pretended that his name was William Marshall and that he had translated it from Italian. Well, that's not true, of course. He wrote the story himself, he just made it up. And in the later edition, in the second edition, he admitted that it was his own work. He just made it up. This made a big difference to the way the critics thought about it. Serious academics and critics were very unhappy that they'd been tricked in that way, and they all now turned around and said, what a piece of rubbish the Castle of Otranto is. But the public didn't care. And they really enjoyed reading this exciting story, even if it wasn't the real Middle Ages, even if it was just, you know, an 18th century made-up version of the Middle Ages. They loved it. And this is where we begin to get a taste for the mystery of the Middle Ages in the 18th century and continuing into the 19th century. So people didn't really care what the critics said, and a popular fashion got started, a fashion for mystery and horror, many of them going back to the Middle Ages, but some of them also going to places that were far away, mysterious places in the Middle East or China, places that were far away, and they had a mysterious atmosphere. And they were called Gothic novels because typically, but not always, as I say, typically they took place in the medieval period, the time of the Gothic style of architecture, the Gothic period. The architecture as well, the strange, well, for us, rather mysterious way of building churches and big buildings in the Middle Ages. That also became fashionable in the 18th century. Let's take a look at the Gothic. What is the Gothic in terms of architecture? And it will help you to understand the environment of this type of literature, the social circles that are associated with that kind of building. So just some pictures here where you can see the Gothic, and you can hear as well what the Gothic means to be. Gothic in the early modern period, it was a negative thing, because the early modern period, the Renaissance period, the 16th, 17th centuries, they look back to the purity of Roman times, and the Ageless was just like the light of God, now it's what's just behind you. We're not going to and we had books like The Castle of Otranto, The Old English Baron, The Mysteries of Udolpho, The Monk. Notice several female writers there, Clara Reeve, Anne Radcliffe. So women were writing these novels as well. And Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Remember, we saw Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, when we were talking about early feminism. And her Frankenstein, together with John William Polidori's The Vampire, these came out in the early 19th century. And after that, Gothic lost its popularity as a pure genre. Though later on in the 19th century, we get Bram Stoker's Dracula, we get Jekyll and Hyde from Robert Louis Stevenson, and you start to get the Gothic come international again. So as a pure genre, it lost its popularity in the 19th century. But it continued to be an important part of novels. So we get novels which are not purely Gothic, but which have a Gothic element. For example, when we look at the Bronte sisters, when you look at Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, there's a sense of pushy, mystery, weird stuff going on. And I think that weird, spooky. So let's take a look at the kinds of themes, the motifs, the ideas that run through the Gothic as a genre. We've got medieval settings, we've also got remote settings. I think on the blog, when somebody was asking about people believing in monsters, I said that they would usually put those monsters in the Middle Ages, long ago. Or if they weren't long ago, they would be far away in distant countries. Because people kind of know that when you wake up in the morning, you don't see dragons. You don't see weird creatures with two heads. So people would put those things into the Middle Ages, or they'd put them into countries far away, because people knew that those things don't really exist in their immediate environment. So the Gothic specialized in places that were far away and mysterious, or that were mysterious because they were going back to especially the medieval past. And a typical environment was the medieval castle. When you think of Frankenstein, when you think of a lot of those kinds of stories, you imagine those castles and medieval buildings that are half ruined and have a sense of them mysterious. And the environment creates a space for weird supernatural events. And also, I don't know why it's come out in white print here, but difficult to read. I'll change that. I hope I can change that before I put it on the web page. But perverse passions and distorted desires. So there's a sort of psychological weirdness. People are twisted. People's minds are kind of twisted. There's a lot of strange psychology going on inside those Gothic novels. Terror, horror, cruelty, lust. Those kinds of themes run through the Gothic. And of course, you say, oh yes, we can find those in things like Arashigaoka, Wuthering Heights, okay? Many of the novels of the 19th century have aspects of these things in them. Ooh. All right, that dark side of human nature. Which also can be seen as a reaction against the Enlightenment, the age of reason. Do you remember last week I was talking about romantic poetry as being a reaction against the Enlightenment, a reaction against the age of reason? That's one kind of reaction. William Blake and his ideas about revolution and energy, that's one kind of reaction. But this is another kind of reaction. The idea that you think suddenly we human beings have grown up, that all those thousands and thousands of years of history when we believed in ghosts and monsters and life was full of shocks and surprises and Meishin superstition, you think that suddenly that's all ended? Not so easy. We don't burn witches anymore. We don't think that it's out there in the world anymore, but it's still there in our psychology, and it comes out in our books, it comes out in our literature. So the Gothic, in many ways, is a reaction against the age of reason, the age of the Enlightenment, which is an age of logic and scientific thinking. All those things that society thought were in the past, things like believing in ghosts, believing in witches, all those superstitious fears, all the torture, the barbaric cruelty of the Middle Ages, all those things of the past, all those dark and primitive lusts and fears of civilization, that civilization sort of keeps in control, that it keeps in check and tries to deny, well, all those things are there in the Gothic. But it's not all just simple horror, and it's not all quite as basic as that. There are more subtle things going on inside the Gothic novel. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Everybody thinks, oh, well, not everybody, but a lot of people think that Frankenstein is the monster. No, Frankenstein is the scientist who makes the monster. It's Frankenstein's monster. And the idea that scientists are making a monster is the important idea behind Frankenstein, that we are making a world that we can't control. And for you people, you may think, oh yes, exactly right. You know, the world of computers, artificial intelligence, AI, it's a big topic right now. Will we be able to control AI? Or will it end up controlling us? Or maybe just killing us off, saying we don't need you anymore. Okay? Computer intelligence, artificial intelligence is a possible challenge to our existence. And back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, Mary Shelley could see that. She could see that possibility. She didn't know about the world of computers and so on, but the idea that scientists would make a monster that it couldn't control. It goes back to the atom bomb, all right, that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a monster that we can't control. Okay, someone like Trump gets his finger on the button and starts pushing, we're all dead. Okay? Artificial intelligence, all of these things are hinted at, expressed in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We get the idea of alienation. Alienation, alien, you know, the word from the movies or science fiction, and alien, a creature from another planet. But alien just basically means like yoso, hoka, hokano, okay? Something that's outside. And alienation, in the writings of Karl Marx, alienation is, firstly, that we are not any more connected. Remember, I think I talked about this when I talked about agriculture. People's lives were connected with the food they ate. People's lives were connected with the clothes they wore. They would make those clothes themselves. They would grow that food themselves. They would milk the cow and drink the milk. They would keep the pig and they would kill the pig and they would eat its meat. They were connected with the food and the housing and the clothing. These things were all part of the process of their life. Once it's all going on in big factories, you just make a buhin, you make a part of something, and you're alienated from, you're separated from the process of making the things and being connected with the things that you use in your life. The food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, the house that you live in. You're no longer connected with it in the way that people were 200 or 300 years ago. So this is alienation. And we can see it in the Gothic writings. We've got the sort of paranoid fear that something is trying to get me, some terrible thing, some monster or some sinister being wants to do us harm, wants to control our lives, something we can't see or understand properly, making us puppets for its own reasons, that we are being made into puppets. We are not being given free lives. Which again goes back to what I said with William Blake last week. And we get a lot of insights into the human psyche. People like to look at the Gothic novel and see what it's telling us about the way that the human mind works. Consciously, we are reasonable, rational people. Under the surface, we don't even understand ourselves. Monomania, the idea that, ha 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 ha, I control everything, I can rule the world. Paranoia, the idea that somebody's trying to hurt me. I don't know who it is. Is it you? Is it you? Okay, that fear that everybody's trying to do you harm. Paranoia. The doppelganger, the idea that I'm me. Where is the other me? There's another me. I feel that there's another me. Is it inside me? Is it somewhere out there? Where is the other me? All right? These kinds of ideas run through the Gothic novel and have become favourite themes for psychological fiction and for the idea that fiction tells us something about the way the human mind works and the darker side of the human mind. So these all come from the late 18th, early 19th centuries, and we get them expressed in characters in Gothic novels. So abnormal mental states, madness, like this picture of a mad woman here. This interest in the mad, the insane, the crazy, was growing throughout this period. What is going on in the heads of mad people? And in some ways, are we all mad? In a certain sense. Monomania was an obsession with a particular emotion. And this is a painting from 1822 showing the monomania of envy. This woman, we use monomania today a little bit more, like I first said, to the belief that we are in control of everything. In the 19th century, when they started using the word monomania, they used it more to mean like an obsession with something. She is obsessed with envy. Her whole life is always, somebody's got something that I haven't got. That's what the eyes are telling you there. I want what they've got. Why have they got it? Why haven't I got it? Envy, jealousy, and the obsessive feeling that somebody's getting something more than I'm getting. Why don't I get it? That feeling was the monomania of envy. But you could have an obsession with different things. So that's one of the words that was growing up and the ways of thinking that was growing up in this period. Paranoia also, as a word, grew up in that period. It was first used in 1818 to show a mind that had a distorted view of the world as a result of one false idea. Again, the way we use the word today is a little bit different. We use it to mean one false idea. The false idea is just one idea, that somebody wants to hurt you, somebody wants to damage you, somebody wants to get you and do you harm. But in the original use of the word, it was just a single false idea. One wrong idea and the whole machine of the human mind can break down. And the word doppelganger comes from a German novelist in 1796. So these words, which we connect with modern psychology, and we think about Freud and Jung from the end of the 19th century, actually many of these words were beginning to be used in the late 18th or early 19th century. And they often came as the result of something that was in a Gothic novel. So the Gothic novel would be the starting point for talking about that particular mental state. All right, let's move on to Dickens himself. He was hugely interested in human character, human personality. So all of these things would have been things that he would have taken an interest in at that time. And he did read these Gothic novels when he was young. And as I say, we can find Gothic elements in several of his novels. One thing that was happening to the Gothic as it moves into the 19th century is it starts to make the world of the Gothic come closer. It's not so much now the Middle Ages or China or the Middle East or the Central Asia. It's not so much those distant places or those long ago times. It's right here. It's now. Okay? So it's right inside the London of Charles Dickens's time. You can be walking in the street and everybody's good morning, good afternoon, and you can walk down a dark alley and suddenly you're in that strange world, some strange place. So the mysterious is not far away or long ago anymore. It's just around the corner. It's right here. It's close to us. So familiar locations like London, for example, become mysterious. And we get this also in Reynolds' Mysteries of London series from 1844, and it's a general kind of tendency. Dickens really doesn't go very far away from London in most of his writings. The furthest he goes away is Yorkshire, and mostly we remember him for his portrayal of dismal, miserable, poor areas of London. And we can also compare his London to the London of the engraver Gustave Doré, which I'll show you in a minute. We'll see some of Doré's works. It's a London that is a place of real bricks and real buildings. It's a real place, but at the same time, it's a mysterious place. It's a landscape of the imagination. Here we go. Something like this, the underground here. Late 19th century. Some kind of factory or warehouse. Look at it. Imagine people in those situations. The streets, people standing out in the streets like that at night time. What are they all doing? What are they thinking about? Okay, an even more mysterious street scene. Imagine walking down that street. Hospital scene. And of course, everything lit by that eerie gas lighting, which in those days was new. Before that, they just had candles and oil. Okay. Good. Nighttime scene. So it's a real place, but it's also a place of mystery. And when we look at the London of Oliver Twist or Bleak House or Our Mutual Friend, it's that kind of place that we imagine. Those kinds of streets with those kinds of people in them. And in the shadows, there are who knows what horrors, who knows what terrible things are in the shadows. Reality becomes mixed in with fiction. So the unconscious mind is filled with a sense of tension and anxiety. We're led away from those familiar streets that we walk down every day into the dark alleys of the city, the dark, hidden corners of the city. And who knows what is there? In Great Expectations, perhaps we can see more of the Gothic than in any of Dickens's other works. It's got a huge range of strange Gothic motifs in it. It's a wonderful novel, by the way. If you don't know Great Expectations, I hope you'll have a chance, maybe one day, even if you just watch a movie version, okay? But if you have a chance to read the book, well, so much the better. It starts on the Kent marshes, and the River Thames is widening out before it goes into the sea. Out there on the marshes, in that wild landscape, Dickens shows us a gallows right at the beginning of the novel. Pip is out in that countryside. He's going to put some flowers by the grave of his mother and father. He's a little boy, and he runs past the gallows on his way to the church. And the graveyard is in front of the church, and he's there, putting the flowers there, when suddenly a strange man appears, picks Pip up, shakes him by the feet so that the money comes out of his pockets. A wild man who has escaped from prison. Very much the Gothic, very much the atmosphere of mystery, strangeness, wildness, and a sense that anything can happen. So he's pounced on by an escaped convict, an escaped prisoner. And he has to steal food from his family and get a metal file, so that the convict can cut the chains that are around his feet. And he's terrified. The convict tells him, "I have a friend. I'm a nice guy, but I have a friend, and he's waiting. He just loves to eat little boys like you." So he terrifies Pip into believing that there's somebody else who will actually kind of kill him if he doesn't obey the convict. So he's pushed into that strange world at that time, and then later on, shortly afterwards, the next thing that happens, he's thrust into the macabre world of a strange old lady called Miss Havisham. Now, Miss Havisham, many years ago, on the morning of her wedding, she waited for her future husband. He never came. The clock stopped. The wedding cake, the whole reception, the wedding dress, she never took it off. Years and years go past, and she's living in a strange world, a crazy world of betrayal. She's a very rich lady, she can live her own life, but her life is never to go out into the sunshine, always to think of, he didn't come, he betrayed me, and to leave the wedding cake there for years and years and years, so that the mice and the insects are eating away at it over the years. And Pip comes into this strange world. Very, very Gothic. Very, very Gothic. So, Great Expectations is full of these kinds of Gothic elements. And one of the major themes of the novel is that Pip's life is being controlled. Pip is a poor boy, but one day he is told he will be a gentleman. He's given money. He's sent off to London. He's being educated to be a gentleman. Who is controlling Pip's life? Pip thinks that it's the old lady, but in fact, it's the convict. I've said it's Magwitch, but I needed to explain that Magwitch is the convict, the prisoner. The prisoner was helped by Pip, and although he was caught again afterwards, he never forgot that the little boy was kind to him. And so he was taken away. What did they do to prisoners in those days, criminals? If they didn't hang them, if they didn't put them to death, very often, what did they do? Do you remember? I said, they could put you to death just for stealing a lamb or for shooting a rabbit. But if they didn't put you to death for it, what did they often do? send them, yes, originally to America, and then after American independence to Australia as convicts. So they would be sent off on ships. Many, many hundreds of ships were sent to America and Australia, and these people were forced to work for 10 years, 20 years, something like that. But when they finished their punishment, they were free. And this man, Magwitch, he became free, he became rich. He never forgot the little boy back in England who helped him. And he decided, I will help that little boy. I will make him a gentleman. So the person who's controlling Pip's life is not, as he supposes, the old lady. It's the criminal that he helped. It's Magwitch that he helped when he was a little boy. So Dickens says this is like Frankenstein, that's the opposite. Instead of the scientist creating the monster, as Pip notices, the imaginary student pursued by the misshapen creature he had impiously made was not, that's the imaginary student, the misshapen creature, that's Frankenstein, and his monster was not more wretched than I, pursued by the creature who had made me. It's the monster who makes Pip. Instead of the scientist, in Frankenstein, Frankenstein makes the monster. In Great Expectation, the monster makes Pip. His identity is determined and shaped by the criminal, the monster. Recoiling from him with a stronger repulsion the more he admired me and the fonder he was of me. He's being created by the monster. So Dickens mentions, he's referring explicitly to Frankenstein here and saying, instead of Frankenstein making the monster makes Pip. Pip his identity has been shaped, he's been controlled by the monster. Although in the end, Magwitch is not so much of a monster, but that's the image. And the whole novel has got these strange figures like Orlick, who works alongside Pip when he's apprenticed as a blacksmith. Orlick later tries to murder Pip. He tries to kill him. Compeyson, Magwitch's companion in crime, and even the boy that Pip engages as a servant at his lodgings in London. All these characters are like the characters from a Gothic novel. They're more than real. They are bukimi, weird. And then there's the twisted love story between Pip and Estella, the cold-hearted girl who slapped his face when he met her originally. And again, her identity has been moulded by Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham was betrayed by a man, so she takes Estella and brings up Estella as a woman who will take revenge on men. She's a cold woman who doesn't know love, and she will punish men. That's Miss Havisham's revenge. I give you Estella. She will break you men. She will break your hearts. So it's full of twisted emotions, twisted motives. The whole novel is really very, very Gothic. In the end, we find that Estella is the daughter of Magwitch, the same criminal who controls, the convict who controls Pip's life. And it was Compeyson, the evil Compeyson, whom Magwitch hates, is the person who abandoned Miss Havisham, the person who didn't come on her wedding day. What an extraordinary story. So all of this is connected with questions of identity. Identity is perhaps the central theme of the novel, every novel that's ever been written. And between them, Magwitch and Miss Havisham are shaping Pip's identity. And all through the novel, we imagine the Pip that might have been, if only they hadn't controlled his life. What would Pip's life have been then? So we got Frankenstein and his monster. We've got Jekyll and Hyde and Dorian Gray. We've got the Gothic novel all the way through, showing the divided self, the difference between who we think we are and who we really are. But we all want to be great, we all want to be good, but we are animals at the same time. We are very clever animals, but we are animals. And the Gothic explores that mysterious line of identity, the animal identity against the ideal, higher identity that we want to have as human beings. Again, in A Tale of Two Cities, Dickens shows the same thing. At the time of the French Revolution, remember we talked about the French Revolution 2 or 3 times in the classes so far. We've got 2 people who look very similar, doppelganger type situation. 2 people who look very similar, except that one of them is a very good guy and the other one is not a very good guy. And the very good guy ends up in prison. They're going to cut his head off. So throughout the novel, we can't see the difference between them physically. They're so similar, but Darnay is a good man and Carton is a worthless man. And then at the end, Darnay is in prison, he's waiting to have his head chopped off, and Carton changes places with him, so that the bad man, in the end, does one good thing. He dies so that the good man can live. All his life he's been a bad guy. But he says, wait a minute, I'm a bad guy. If anybody should die, it could be me. And we look so similar. Okay, so he goes in to visit him, and then he says, get him out of here. I'm going to stay. And they don't know the difference, and the bad guy gives his life. I think, again, it's got the idea that there are no good people and no bad people in the world. There are bad people who do good things, and there are good people who do bad things. We often think, he's a bad person. It's not really like that. That's something else that the novel explores. Identity is much more complex. Good people do bad things. Bad people do good things. Okay? So that's another aspect of the Gothic. And that's something that Dickens explores in A Tale of Two Cities. So we've got, all the time, we've got heroes and villains, good guys and bad guys. But the point that the Gothic really brings out is that life is not about good guys and bad guys. Life is about, inside all of us, we have the chance to do good things and we have the chance to do bad things. And sometimes we do good things and sometimes we do bad things. Human nature is torn between its higher identity and its lower identity. And the Gothic focuses on this. Now, if you're interested in the topic, there are various 19th century texts that you might want to have a look at. Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey is a kind of parody. A parody is like, it's not exactly serious. It's making a kind of joke out of the genre. Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, I've mentioned before during the course of the lecture. But I think if you are interested in the Gothic, certainly those 3 stand out, as well as the works of Dickens that I've talked about. So this is something that crosses the late 18th century and the 19th century. And it is, again, a sort of reaction against the Age of Reason. Okay, sorry that the presentation didn't work too well at the beginning, but I think